we want to talk about the priest as the public relations man for a school, and a couple of points to start with. There is the work of the priest in public relations ad intra and ad extra. Ad intra, within the community of the parish, and I've alluded to this several times already, but we have to give clear signals to the people that the necessary option is the use of the Catholic school. It's not simply something that if you have a few thousand extra shekels, you may want to waste your money on it and do it, right? And so that has to be clearly stated and on a regular basis. It's not something, a nice little line to throw out for Catholic Schools Week. And people need to know that it's your priority. And if you're a good leader, your priority becomes their priority. Within the community at large, there is a very important role. And because you are interfacing with all kinds of people, whether they're other clergy or city officials, public school officials, but people will recognize you as the man to go to, but you also have to be the one that very much leads the charge in terms of making sure that the school is acknowledged, so that people know that if somebody from your secretary or your principal sends a public relations notice to the newspaper or the radio station or the television station or whatever, that you're going to expect that that's going to get the publicity that you want for it. And if it doesn't, you're going to follow up on this. And let's face it, in any community that I know, of all the religious communities that are there, the Catholic is the largest, right? And people have to know that we expect to get the treatment that we deserve for all of this. Back within the parish itself, it's important to make the point repeatedly that the support of the school is the responsibility of everybody in the parish. And I would make a pitch in particular to senior citizens. You know, very often they've got this wonderful idea that once they turn 62, they're exempt from everything. And I've had, senior citizens tell me that they're exempt from the communion fast, they're exempt from Friday abstinence. Oh, well, I'm a senior citizen. Well, where's that in the Code of Canon Law, And and they also think they're exempt from supporting anything. I lived on a fixed income. Well, who doesn't? But it doesn't stop them around here from going down to Atlantic City every week on their fixed income. And I think that has to be challenged. And as I mentioned in one of the sessions, that my approach to them is, when you went to Catholic school, you probably were tuition free. And your children, probably, it was a pittance. And now we're talking about massive amounts of money. And therefore, pay up, all right? Stop worrying about taking all your vacations and all the rest of it and leaving your money to your dog or something. Make sure that it's part of your commitment to this parish and in gratitude for the education that you received. I think all of that is very important to say. I get some literature from the Society of St. Pius X, and I'm not a fan of the SSPX. However, it's fascinating to me. A lot of people don't realize this, but the Lefebvrists are extremely strong supporters of Catholic education and actually death on homeschooling. One would not think that, right? But Lefebvre, of course, was a missionary in Africa. And what was the first thing that the missionaries did in Africa was open a school. And he had schools with 90% Muslim children in it and all the rest of it. But this, I'll pass this around, but I do want it back. And last year for the seminar, I had gotten about 40 of these for the people in attendance. But this is a wonderful, wonderful explanation of the importance of a school. And like fundamentalist Christians, who have very, very small communities, the Lefebvres, if they have 30, 40 families in a parish, they open a school. And here we are with parishes with 3,000 kids in CCD, and we say, well, we can't afford a school. Well, how is that? All right. You know, just south of here in Ocean County, all of the Catholic schools are full, but you have parishes, again, with 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 kids in CCD, and no one has challenged the pastor to open a school. And so, as a matter of fact, when it's been brought up, they say, oh, God, no, I don't want that, all right? So you have the CCD circus going instead. And we can't afford it, we don't have this, we don't have that. But here you got these little people. They have a school in upstate New York on the Canadian border. They've got 60 kids, K to 12, a classical curriculum, and you'll see, you know, pictures in here. And very, very impressive. I talked to the priest. I called him last year, and their tuition is $500 for grammar school, $1,000 for high school. And now they're not into all the nonsense with all the bells and whistles. It's a basic classical Catholic education, and the kids do very, very well. And that's a challenge that needs to be leveled on a regular basis, is how is it that these little fundamentalist Christian congregations can do what we can't do? Because it's not that we can't do it, we don't want to do it, all right? The will to do it isn't there. And I think that's a very important issue to raise. Msgr Bob Batul is with us tonight. He's from the Rockville Center Diocese. He teaches at the conglomerate seminary for the three contiguous dioceses of New York, Brooklyn, and Rockville Center. But he was pastor of a parish on Long Island. When he was pastor there, they had a school, they had a rather reasonably thriving parish community. He came back 10 years later to the same place. There was no more school, there was almost no parish, right? And so how did that all happen? Well, his successor. And you say, you know, once again, how the influence of one particular person, namely the parish priest. And so before we throw the ball to Monsignor Schaedel, we have an alumnus. You heard Father Chris Peschel this morning, or this afternoon, another alumnus of last year's program, Father Dave Waters, who's a priest of Philadelphia Archdiocese. And he was with us last summer. And I asked him to talk about the things he's been doing in his parish school this year and what he envisions doing next year. So.
Well, I suppose that, you know, in my own little role as a parish curate at my parish, I'm in a about 2,000 family parish west of the Philadelphia airport in Morton, which is about maybe 2,000 families. So in any case, the first thing I guess I started doing is, of course, you have to be there, right? So some priests are terrified of schools, and especially so in certain dioceses because of the issue of children. So I don't care. I make it a point to be there at least 4 times a week and to show up and just be around. I teach Spanish twice a week. I teach religion, of course. And sometimes I do little seminars. So for instance, there was a survey that went out that said among Catholic school grads even, those that decided that they left the faith did so or decided to do so from the 6th to the 8th grade. And what was the defining issue? Science and the so-called incompatibility with religion. So reading it, I decided to do my part. And so I started a seminar for about 3 days each for each thing for the 7th and 8th graders to do. We did basic, you know, Catholic doctrine on faith and religious science, what faith and reason means. And then also we did the first 3 chapters of Genesis and just went through it and what do they think, or, you know, what does popular opinion say about it, what does the church say about it. So these are things I've been engaged in, you know, not counting, of course, the extracurricular activities that take place there. So it's been something that's very interesting to me because I always find, especially these kids who, they tend to think that as priests even, like the only thing they can do is religion. But when you do things like science, when you do things like history, now not everyone has a toolkit for these things, but when you do all these things, it really does open their eyes that, okay, priests can be smart cookies. Priests can do more things than simply religion, or that my faith is applicable to other fields. And I think that that's very important for young minds to take in. And also to have just the accessibility so that they know you other than just the altar. And that they know also that what a priest does is far more than simply to say Mass on Sunday. That he's a person who does a lot of other things or has the capability of doing many different things. So that's been one of my things that I've been doing there at the school. Another thing I was working on was hoping to increase their exposure to church tradition. I was trying to start a Latin class for the kids. That hasn't quite taken off because of curriculum and scheduling things with the principal, but it's something I'm interested in doing for them in the next year, just basic, Latin. I'm not expecting them to know Cicero, but we can at least do basic things so that they can do, they can say the psalms at Mass, know what they're saying, they can say the Agnus Dei and so on, and just have basic things in place. Not to mention, it puts them in a great place to do all the Romance languages in high school. So that's kind of where I'm at with my presence in the school. And it's really been very powerful because, it's great when the kids say, Father, that's so interesting. Or that's really interesting. I never heard that before. Because I think, especially the priest is in a position, as I certainly have been, a lot of our teachers, and not, there's many, many good ones, but many of them don't have the toolkit, as I said before, to integrate certain things. So many have, say, a science background. One has a religion background. One has an English background. We're not like the old polymaths of old, where you had a sister who taught history and English and everything else. So to be able to have kind of a universal kind of outlook on things is kind of helpful, because then you're tying it all together. You're making it a real Catholic education. And I think a priest, granted his education in most places, especially in this country, should have the ability to tie these things together and make the Catholic faith look attractive on an intellectual and personal level. I was reading an article earlier this month about a priest who, it was in Time Magazine, you may have seen it, about there was a particular priest who would don a sombrero and go throughout the schools, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that. That was kind of his gig, to make the kids kind of engaged or whatever. But whatever your skills are, just to be there. And I'm talking to people many years my senior, not all, but it's very important to me that you're there, that I'm there, and I think the kids really draw out of it too. And that and I'm happy to say that it seems, anyway, when I go, they're happy that I've come. The kids wanted to see, or they perk up because they know what I have to say is interesting. It's not just the book. It's something that will engage them. So, and also I give the teacher a break, and they like that once in a while. So that's my experience this past year, and hopefully in the year to come I'm thinking about more things that I can kind of dip my hand in.
I will also mention this, that one of the roles that a priest can fulfill very well in a school is when certain issues come up, let's say in a science class or a history class, that the lay teacher is not competent or comfortable in handling, to say, Father, could you come to class tomorrow and talk about this issue? And so, with Father, and so everybody doesn't have to have total competence. It's not the Renaissance, unfortunately, anymore, but that there are resource people, and the priest ought to be one of those resource individuals for a school, particularly in a way of integrating the faith into the secular disciplines. Any comments on that score? Monsignor has an interesting background. He's a very interesting.
Yeah. And let me tell you a little bit about that. I think Peter asked me to be part of this panel because he knows of my pretty much uncompromising promotion of Catholic schools. So to tell you a little bit about where I personally am coming from, but also I think I'm the only one here from the Midwest. And my experience of Catholic schools is very much the same as you all, but a little bit different. I was born and raised in Indianapolis. My dad's family was from Chicago. My mother was from Ireland. And both sides of the family, everybody went to Catholic schools. I mean, I guess we never thought about it. Everybody, all my cousins, dad is one of 16, mother's one of 13. So I have lots of cousins, but everybody went to Catholic schools. That's just the way it was done. However, I would say in Indianapolis at best, is only about 15% Catholic. I'm talking about the city. The city's about a little over 1 million, 15% Catholic. When I started school in 1954, in first grade, kindergartens weren't invented yet.
Did you have cars?
Yeah, we had cars. If you sent your child to the government state school, government school, or another school, you had to get the permission of the pastor.
That's right.
And if you didn't get the permission of the pastor, you could not receive the sacraments. And that was the rule.
Well, that was the code of canon law.
Well, yeah, right. Now it changed by the time I graduated from grammar school, but that's the way it was. And so I'm coming from that kind of a background. The other thing Peter was talking about last night, we all, I mean, all the schools that I've ever heard of around Indianapolis or the Midwest, we went to Mass every day, 5 days a week. When you said you only went on the first Friday,
Yeah.
that
was a very Midwest thing, and I try to figure that out. Those of us from the Northeast, I'm not familiar with anyone. Arthur, did you go to school, go to Mass during the week at school? No. You did.
Buffalo.
Well, that's the Midwest.
No, I said, you said Northeast.
Yeah.
Buffalo.
That's not the Northeast, sister. That's the Midwest.
I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about you being in the Northeast.
No.
You were in the Midwest too.
we had a string of bishops who.
Well, let me give you an explanation why I think that was the case. In the Northeast, with large parishes and large schools, invariably there was a convent mass every morning, and the nuns would go to Mass in the convent and then go to school. Once you moved out of the large population centers, where often enough you had only one priest, the nuns had to go to Mass. And so the kids went with the nuns. And I think that's how that got started outside the big population
So
centers.
we went 5 days a week. We had about 1,000 kids in school at the time. We had 3 priests. One priest, well, the 2 associates. We had a couple of bishops that really promoted daily reception of the Eucharist. So we had, in addition to the 3 masses every morning, we had a communion service every 20 minutes.
Oh,
And it wouldn't be unusual for the young associate to give out communion, drive a bus route, come back, give out communion, drive another bus. They really did. We went to Mass every day, 5 days a week, and the other 2 priests were hearing confessions while one priest was saying Mass, and we rotated through, not how long it took to hear all those confessions, but your robe just went. I mean, you didn't ask if you wanted to go, you just went. I'm not saying all this is good, but at least that's where I'm coming from. But so in my experience with the priest and with the sisters, I just had the impression that they were happy people. They were happy, but they were at peace and seemed to be well adjusted. And that largely was the seeds of my vocation to priesthood. I was always interested in teaching. I got a job teaching at my home parish because they needed somebody at the last minute when I only had 2 years college. I was 20 years old and I taught the 5th grade, 4 years. I got my degree after 2 years. And then after 4 years, something absolutely unheard of, at a neighboring parish, the pastor, this was a Franciscan parish, got into it with the principal over some pretty important issues. And this was in '72. And the sisters of St. Joseph got mad and withdrew from the parish. And at that time, it was thought that absolutely impossible to have a Catholic school without sisters. Nobody had ever heard of such a thing. Well, long story short, I applied for and became the first principal. So I was the first lay principal in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, and that was in the summer of '72. Now, it was kind of nice because in the beginning, I'd be in the office and a salesperson would come by and he'd say, "Is Sister here?" I'd say, "No." You know when she's coming back? No. So I got rid of all the salesmen. Now, but it changed pretty rapidly after that. But the first couple of years, I would go to principals' meetings. It was all the sisters and me. Okay. So that's
Blessed art thou among women.
yeah, right. Did that for 6 years, and then I decided I wanted to go to the seminary. So I was 30 when I went to St. Minor to the seminary. I first came out, I was an associate in a small town, and then we kind of had the Philadelphia plan. A lot of guys taught. So I had a teacher's license, so I went to a high school and taught algebra and religion for 5 years, and then I was made an assistant principal for 4, and then I was principal for 3. One of the things we did when I was assistant principal, we had like 3 of our feeder schools, and this was another gimmick that people thought was a brilliant idea at the time. Let's drop the 7th and 8th grade.
Oh,
So
yeah.
these schools were K through 6. Well, we said, well, these kids aren't going to go to the public school for 7 and then come back to us for high school. So we started a junior high section. It was completely separate from the school, but it was part of the high school, and that continues today. After that, I was a principal, and we got a new Archbishop, Daniel B. Klein. Daniel B. Klein was a Benedictine monk. He had been my rector at the seminary. Very pro-school. He had been the Bishop of Memphis. And his first decision within a month of being the new Bishop of Memphis, he had to make a decision. He bought a very exclusive private school and turned it into a Catholic school. And that place it's K through 12. It's still going today. He's also the bishop that headed the committee that reviewed the catechetical materials for the bishops and found them to be very lacking. So he's really a solid. He's had a couple strokes now. He's retired. Very solid citizen, but very pro-school. During my time, or during his time, he opened 5 new Catholic schools, 3 elementary schools and 2 high schools in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. So I had the great opportunity to work with him and to be mentored by him. We spent a lot of time worrying about the Center City schools, how we're going to keep these schools open, how do we fund them, how do we build enrollment. I think I mentioned last night that we decided, well, let's make them charter schools. That didn't work. And we made them regional. That didn't work either. But and they're now under the auspices of, he was here this morning, of Notre Dame. They're what they call the ACE Academy.
ACE, yeah.
Notre Dame is assisting us in administering those schools. But and Archbishop B. Klein built the first brand new Catholic school in the inner city that had been built in 40 years. And that was about 1998 or something like that. We built a brand new Catholic school, completely African-American neighborhood in the inner city. A little bit about his leadership, and probably about my leadership now, was one of the things I got to do later on. I was the vicar general after I left the high school. But he pulled 2 things on me. One was, I was the principal at the high school, and he came and he called me aside at a priest council meeting as we were beginning, and he said, Joe, he said, I want you to be the vocation director. I'm appointing you vocation director. And I said, oh, okay. But then at the break, he said, but of course you'll continue to be principal of the high school at the same time. So I did that. Well, eventually I became the vicar general, did that for 17 years. One of the things that I got to do as a vicar general was start a seminary. And that's how this happened. We have in Indianapolis, Marian University now, it was Marian College, a Catholic liberal arts college that was floundering. And their current president is a man named Dan Elsner. Dan Elsner grew up and taught in the Diocese of Lincoln. And he was the superintendent of schools for the Diocese of Wichita. So he's got a strong, and he has restored the Catholic identity, the Catholic character of Marian University, and been tremendously established. So he's tripled the enrollment. They started 4 years ago a medical school. It's a new Catholic medical school. So just by restoring that Catholic identity, I think he's worked wonders. But anyway, the Benedictine seminary, St. Meinrad in southern Indiana, had closed the college division. It's its only school of theology now. And we began sending our guys to St. John Vianney in Minneapolis, St. Paul, which is an excellent seminary, but it was so far away for us. So Archbishop B. Klein got the idea that he wanted to start a college house of formation seminary on the campus of this Catholic college. So we went to a meeting, and it was Archbishop B. Klein and Dan Elsner, the president of the college, the priest he had selected to be the rector, and then the head of the theology department at the college. We sat down, we talked for about 15 minutes, and Archbishop P. Klein said, well, we're going to start the seminary. And President Ellsworth said, that's great. And then the two of them walked out of the room, and they just looked at us and said, do it. And we did. You know, really, the fellow that was the rector of the seminary, the original rector, he did. I bought the property and stuff like that. But he really helped design the curriculum. It's a tremendously successful place now. So I did that for 17 years. Then I went to Rome for a sabbatical, and then I came back, and I finally got the cruise I signed on for. I'm a pastor of a parish with a Catholic school. Our parish is on the north side of the city. It's about 2,000 families, which for us is pretty big. We'd be about the third largest parish in the Archdiocese. It is the most affluent parish in the Archdiocese. 2,000 families, we have 640 in school. And I have 2 associates. And so there we are. But a little bit about the priest as PR agent, knowing that about all my my background and my success and love for Catholic schools. People know, and I don't think I'm too blatant about this. Some would say I am. I just, they just know I expect them to send their kids to the Catholic schools. You know? And if they don't, I ask them why. You know, what's in a nice way. I don't deny them the Eucharist or any of that kind of stuff. Well, I feel like it sometimes, but they just know that's kind of an expectation. And a lot of my reasoning is some of the things that we have discussed here is how the school builds community. You know, if you're a parent in a parish, but your kids are over here, you're divided among 2 communities, you know, with your volunteer time and everything else. And then the whole idea of evangelization. When Steve was talking this morning, just since Christmas and the school families, I have convalidated 4 irregular marriages. And none of them were married and divorced. They just didn't get married in church for no good reason, as far as I can tell. But all those people came into this situation of getting their marriage regularized because of the school. We've had every year at Easter Vigil, we had, you know, at least one family into the church because they went to the school. Okay. So there's about 640 in the school. There'd be probably 70 in CCD. And I was telling, I mean, my goal is to put CCD out of business. I've had people, even priests, say, well, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Well, it can't be. If I thought that, I'd close the school and save several $1 million, you know, if they're the same equation. But I think it's a great tool for evangelization. We talked about that last night, even more now than maybe even when our schools were started. So that's kind of my story. That's kind of my theory. And again, the people kind of know that I expect them to send their kids to the Catholic school. And if they don't, I'd really like to know why. We're in a very good position. I mean, well, first of all, it's an affluent parish. But as you heard this afternoon, Indiana has the most liberal voucher program in the nation. So I can truthfully say, sending your kids to a Catholic school in Indiana, it's not a financial decision. You know, there's absolutely no way that you could say you can't afford it with all the financial aid that we have to give them with the vouchers. Affluent parish, but we have in our school, there's 88 kids that are on vouchers. And they're not new kids, they're kids, families that have been there for years. But I think those families are really struggling to put their kids in Catholic school, and now they're finally getting some help from the government. So I'm able to say to people, you know, money's not an issue. You know, you may have some issue with the school, but money's not. And I would have to say too that I think you know, we have a lot of resources. So as opposed to some other schools, we have lots of resources. I make it a point to be in school every day. Our kids go to Mass twice a week. and then they go to confession. It's really interesting. We have a penance service for the lower grades in Advent and Lent, and but every other Wednesday, the older kids can go during their lunch hour recess if they want to go, and they keep us busy. There's two of us all the time. Keep us busy the whole time. So it's not a forced march, but they do come to reconciliation. So, and my predecessor started that, and I really feel good about that. So I'm in the school every day. At least I walk through. I usually eat lunch over there. We don't have a cook, and their lunches aren't that bad. They're sure as heck better than when I was in school. I do not get up in the morning and say hello to all the kids, but I do stand there at dismissal. And I guess I'm not a morning person. But a couple of our pastors do. They get there every morning, and the car pulls up, and they open the car door and let the kids out and greet them. But I usually say, adios at dismissal time. I try to go to their ball games, their plays, and so on and so forth. But there are some even parents that they don't quite get the priest role in the school. They're at one end or the other. Somebody would come to see me in my office if little Susie got a B and they wanted her to have an A. So I'm supposed to do something about that. On the other hand, I had somebody, we just hired a new principal. And one of the parents said, "Oh, the new principal." I said, "Yeah." And the parent said to me, "Have you met her yet?" Oh, hell, I hired her, of course. So I'm either changing kids' grades or I don't even know who the new principal is yet. It's one extreme or the other. But that's the story. That's my, I've just always had a tremendously positive experience on both sides of the desk in Catholic schools. And so that's why I promoted. And I worked under a bishop and some pastors that felt the same way. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Now you can see why I dragged him here. A couple of points, and then we'll open it up for a general discussion. Monsignor is talking about forming community, big community in the parish through the school. Last night you heard Rick Huff talk about his experience as a parent of Catholic school children. His wife, Vera, was a latecomer into the church. He told you last night that as soon as they got married, he became a Catholic and the kids went to Catholic school. And Vera their eldest was actually in high school when she became a Catholic. But how did it happen? She would bring the kids to school every morning. And twice a week, the school moms had a Bible study. They would go to the 8:15 Mass after dropping the kids off, and they would have a Bible study. And those mothers invited Vera, come to our Mass, come to our Bible study. And through contact with the Catholic school mothers, she said, these are really good, intelligent women and value-oriented and so forth. And she went along with them for that experience, and eventually, as a result, came into the church herself. We're told we're not supposed to compare school effects with CCD effects, but I think it's stupid not to. There's a pastor in the Miami Archdiocese. It's a very large school. He has 900 kids. And in an affluent area, and the first time I went there, I was surprised to see that half the school were little Hispanic kids. And I said, how does this happen? And he said, actually, those are the children of a lot of the servants and the maids and so forth of these millionaires. And I said, what do you do about the tuition situation? And he said, none of them are paying tuition. He said, other people, I say, a new family has moved in from wherever, and these other people will say, send us the bill. But he has a couple hundred kids in CCD. The school is full. It's 989 kids in the school. That's what it is at the moment. But he has a couple of hundred in CCD, and he does an interesting thing at First Communion, he's got 4 First Communions, 2 on 2 Saturdays and 2 the following Saturday. And one is Catholic school, one is CCD, one is Catholic school, one is CCD. And the Sunday after their First Communion, he tells the children and the parents that if you come in your First Communion outfit on Sunday, you will be allowed to come up first in line to receive Holy Communion. And he said, the Catholic school kids, let's say there are 150 First Communions, and he said, I'll have 100 of those kids that Sunday coming up in their communion outfits. Last year, not a single CCD kid appeared at Sunday Mass. So First Communion, all right, that ended it until what Francis calls the exit sacrament of confirmation. Right? It's simply a sacramental filling station, a check mark, and that's the end of the story. Talking about a lay faculty, and this is something that I think we have to help people be comfortable with. And it's amazing. You know, we have preponderance of lay faculties for well over 30 years now, but some people, for them, it's still a stumbling block. Well, if there aren't 12 nuns in the school, it's not really a Catholic school. And one of the points I make is, let's remember, Mother Seton was a lay woman when she started this gig, all right? Archbishop Carroll kind of pushed her to become a nun. And the very first Catholic schools in the United States were all run by lay people. In fact, it's kind of amusing, in what was the Diocese of Trenton, but now Metuchen, the first Catholic school in that area was bought, the property was bought and staffed all by lay teachers, Lambertville, St. John's in Lambertville. For 100 years, lay teachers. And then in the late 50s, the early 60s, the Sisters of Mercy came in, and 10 years later, they withdrew and closed the school. So the school was run by lay people very successfully for 100 years, and the nuns were there for 10 years and screwed it all up. So it's not a question of, you know, you have to have sisters or have to have priests. It's who are the people who are well-formed. And these lay people were very, very well-formed.
You know, coming off that, I meant to say this. See, in the Midwest, the hallmark of a Catholic school where there were nuns and they went to Mass every day. A lot of homeschool parents, we don't have hardly any in my parish, now another parish where I was. We don't send our kids to Catholic school because they don't go to Mass every day.
Yep.
That was the hallmark of going to Catholic school. The other thing is, again, we're blessed in so many ways. When I first went to St. Luke, the school is full. And I waited, and then I just told the school commission, I said, it was a waiting list. I said, we're not turning anybody away anymore. He said, what? I said, I spent 17 years in the chancery trying to keep schools open and build enrollment. And I'm not going to come up here and turn people away. And they said, well, what are we going to do? And I said, oh, well, but you figure it out. It's my Beekline, Archbishop Beekline stop. So we do not turn any Catholic children away. We'll open another classroom if we need to, and we will this year. So we'll have 4 sections of 1 grade. But that's just the way it is. Another thing, and I don't know if it's fair or not, but I really don't care. Nobody works in, I don't hire anybody who didn't send their kids to Catholic.
Exactly.
Yeah. You're not going to be on my payroll if you don't send your kids to Catholic school. Because there's plenty of people working their tail off to keep their kids in Catholic school. And I'm going to give them a job first. Okay? I don't say that, but that's the way it is. The other thing, I think you were talking about this last night, Peter. Always I don't really, when I was principal, I had more than hired. I never was uncomfortable hiring a teacher that hadn't taught in Catholic school before. But I would never hire one that hadn't gone to a Catholic school. Mm-hmm. If they went to a Catholic school, they knew what it was about, even if they had taught in public school. But I didn't think the reverse was true. It may be in certain circumstances.
He was talking about, he began his teaching career sophomore year of college. I beat him by a year, actually. I was a freshman, college seminary here. And my alma mater, in the middle of freshman year, one of the nuns flew the coop, who was teaching Latin. And the pastor called me here and said, second semester, can you rearrange your schedule at the university so that you can maybe take classes at the university Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then come teach Latin Tuesday and Thursday back to back. Latin 1, periods 1 and 2, Latin 2, periods 3, 4. So I was actually teaching in the high school that I had gone to. And all those kids had known me as a student there, and I was 17 years old, and so it was baptism by fire. And of course, discipline was obviously a question. And my idea of discipline was to shout. And one of the old nuns said, honey, come here. Let me explain something. You're giving them a free show. Never shout. When you're angry, give the look and whisper. She said, that'll scare them. She said, they're trying to antagonize you. They want to get a free show. And she had all kinds of wonderful advice. She said, the role of a Catholic school teacher is to make the good thing the popular thing. And she said, there's always going to be peer pressure on a child. Just make sure it's peer pressure going in the right direction. And so I had wonderful formation to teach from some very, very superb educators. The last thing I wanted to mention it in terms of the Catholic identity issue earlier, but somehow or other, I missed it on my notes. And that's the whole question about Sunday Mass. To me, it is inconceivable that a child could go to a Catholic school and not go to Mass on Sunday. And when I was a high school administrator, I had a policy that 3 missed Masses on Sunday, the kid was expelled. That's it. No discussion about it. And now, of course, the next question is, how did you enforce it? And the enforcement was simple. And this is high school. I'll tell you something about how to do it in the grade schools. But in high school, I said, Monday morning, homeroom, everyone has to come in with a signed bulletin, number 1. And number 2, you have to write 2 paragraphs on the homily that you heard. First paragraph, what did he say? Second paragraph, what did you think of it? And they had to be collected by the homeroom teachers. And it was interesting. I never had a single student or a parent who objected. Now, of course, what's a parent going to say? We don't go to Mass and you're not going to tell us we have to? Well, obviously they're not going to say that. Where did I get pushback from? The pastors, who said, first of all, oh, I mean, the burden you're putting on us. I said, I know, Father. I know. I say Mass. It's beyond Calvary myself every day, you know. I said, it's exhausting. And I know signing that name for 30 kids after Mass. By the way, every pastor told me his teenage Mass attendance was up 40 to 50%. Now, in any other business, I'd get a gold star. But in the priesthood, you're condemned for it, all right? And we don't like success in the church. And so they would say, number 1, signing was a great burden. Number 2, you're giving kids a bad taste for religion by forcing them to do this. They should want to go. And I said, well, let me tell you something. And this was on Staten Island. I said, the chairman of our English department requires every kid in the school once a year to go to a Shakespeare play, live Shakespeare play in Manhattan. Now, in New York State, kids don't drive until they're 18, all right? So, first of all, the play would cost about $75. They had to have some kind of a car service to get them there. They weren't going to have a hot dog on the street. They were going to go to dinner. We're talking about probably a $200 expense. Not a single parent complained about it because, as a matter of fact, the parents said, you know, it's wonderful that Mrs. Jones does this because it's giving a kid a taste for culture, which we hope is going to stick with the kid and become a permanent fixture in his life. And I said, and if we're doing that for English, and we should be doing it, then I think we ought to be doing it for something that's far more important than an appreciation for Shakespeare. And I said, and furthermore, I said, we're saving kids' souls. And one pastor said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, we're keeping them from going to hell. And he said, you don't believe that garbage, do you? And so once again, we've met the enemy, and it's us. But it was fascinating. On Fridays in the cafeteria, I walk through the cafeteria every day, but on Fridays, the kids would say, you'd hear them say, "Hey, Tommy, where are you going to Mass on Sunday?" Because the kids among themselves, and I didn't care what parish they went to. I don't care where they put their envelope in or anything else, but they were going to Mass. And they'd say, "Oh, I'm going to St. Teresa's at 5 o'clock on Sunday." Well, why? Well, there's a movie at the Cinemax down the block from there at 7. This will work, right? But they planned their weekend around Sunday Mass. And it was just as normal and natural as could be. Now, with grammar school kids, obviously, they can't drive themselves. And if they're not living in proximity to the church, it's one of the problems of the church in suburbia. We did always well, I think, with the church in the city and the church in the rural parts. Suburbia is a completely different phenomenon. Very, very difficult, I think. But with the grammar school kids, when I hear a kid's confession, and I must say, I ask them some questions, and I'll say, "Do you say your prayers every day? Do you go to Mass on Sunday?" "Well, when I can." And, well, what does that mean? "Well, because sometimes my mommy, sleeps in, and my daddy does this, and so forth." And I say, "Well, but do you want to go to Mass?" "Oh, I want to go to Mass. I always want to go to Mass, but they don't take me." And I said, "Well, if you wanted to go to a basketball game or you want to go to a movie and your mother said no, what would you do?" "Well, I would ask again." I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Here's the deal. Next Saturday, starting at 4 o'clock, you're to ask your parents to take you to Mass until 7 p.m. on Sunday, all right? And when they say no, you tell them repeatedly you want to go. And if that doesn't work, you start screaming and crying until they finally say, 'Get in the car and let's go.'" I said, "And if they ask you why you do that, you say, 'Because the priest told me that's my penance for not going to Mass on Sunday. I've got to make sure that I make your life miserable.'" And it's amazing, And many parents, and by the way, reaction of parents to the regulation about going to Mass, none of them ever said, as I say, that they complained about it. But 2 kinds of responses I got regularly, both grateful. The first was, "Thank you, Father. It's eliminating a fight on Sunday morning." All right? Yeah. "Please don't tell us you can't go. Just get in the truck and let's move, okay?" Or the other half said, "Thank you. We haven't been going to Mass for a long time. Not because we have anything against it. We just got out of the habit. And you got us back into the habit, and thanks for doing that." Right? That's all. And I think it's something that's really very, very simple. Most people, at least my experience, most people who don't go to Mass on Sunday, there's no hostility. It's just a bad habit, And you miss once, and then you miss twice, and after a while you just say, "I feel kind of odd going back even." And it's not bad will. At least that's not my experience. We're not France. That's an entirely different story. But our people here who are not observant, they still identify themselves as Catholic. And it's just a matter of greasing the wheels a bit. And certainly with having a school, they think enough of something that they're making the sacrifice to have the kid there. And I think it's easy enough to push the envelope so that the next logical step is taken in that. So, any overall reactions, questions, comments? Nothing?
I would just add about the parents, when I worked in the chancery, there was a woman that was demanding to talk to the archbishop, so I had to talk to her. She was in a parish where the school was full, and the pastor had come up with criteria: who got in first, who got in second. Well, the people that got in first, or probably the only people that got in, went to Mass every Sunday.
Imagine.
And she was infuriated. You can be kidding.
Well, when John O'Connor was the Archbishop of New York, he had these little sort of listening sessions for different pressure groups, I guess, in the church. And one was sort of by deanery, Catholic school parents. And he was at a session in the South Bronx and he gave his spiel. And at the end, he opened it up for questions. And a woman said, "Your Eminence, I don't know why my child has to go to CCD to make his first Holy Communion." And O'Connor said, "Well, what are you doing here? This is a meeting for Catholic school parents. Why are you here?" And she said, "Well, my kid goes to Catholic school." And he said, "Well, then what are you talking about CCD?" And she said, "Well, the pastor says since most of the kids in the school are not Catholic, we can't do the real Catholic stuff in school, so they have to go to CCD for the sacraments." And in typically O'Connor style, he said, "Is this lady's pastor here?" And so the guy kind of sheepishly stood up and he said, "Is she telling the truth? And if she is, you're telling me the policy has changed right now?" And that was the end of the story. But I mean, I've heard this before, that there's these situations where they're not doing the explicit Catholic stuff in the school, and kids, I mean, well, when I was in Boise, I inherited a situation where confirmation was foolishly in high school, and they had, and we had the only Catholic high school in the state, and all of our kids had to go to CCD in 9th grade to receive confirmation. And I was stunned. I'd never heard this, East Coast boy go into this environment. And I said, "Am I misunderstanding something here?" And they said, no, this is the policy of the diocese. And so I went to the bishop and I said, "This is absurd. These kids have had 8 years of Catholic grammar school. They're now in a Catholic high school getting religion 5 days a week, and we're making them go with kids who are essentially baptized pagans who can't name the persons in the Trinity in order to receive confirmation." And the bishop said, "Well, we can't discriminate between one group and another." And I said, "Well, I'm telling you right now," I said, "I'm telling my kids not to go." And he said, "Well, I made a policy." I said, "Well, you can make the policy, but I'm telling my kids not to go." I said, "Until we fix this up." And very, very short order, it was fixed up. And it's still the right way today now. But this idea about, and also one of the things that has happened, it was frequent in up and through the 70s at least, if you had a CCD program, that you had the Catholic school confirmation and the public school confirmation, First Communion separate and so forth. And then they decided they were merging them because it was too embarrassing when the bishop would ask questions at confirmation, that at the CCD confirmations, there'd be no answers. And so we wanted to mix them all in so it wouldn't look so bad. And I think that's, again, we're not dealing with reality. If it looks so bad, there's a reason for that, okay? And that's what ought to be addressed. Anything else? Well, actually, we're a little bit ahead of schedule. So let's come back at 8:30, is that where? Yeah, we'll come back at 8:30, and we're going to have a little video presentation.